Welcome back to Terms of Service. I'm Claire Duffy. You may have noticed that tech platforms are increasingly trying to figure out how old you are. So what's the deal with that? And should we be worried about handing over our personal information to these platforms? I am here today to answer that question with CT Jones. CT is a writer for Rolling Stone magazine, and you have covered this trend of online platforms doing age verification. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we're seeing this growing trend of websites and social media platforms, soon maybe also the app stores, looking to verify users' ages. Why is this happening right now?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that's really easy to say is because the internet is growing. This is where people are doing their commerce. This is where people are doing their communication. And if you see historically, there's always been a legal push to limit or put restrictions on the newest thing. So before the internet, you had parents worried about video games. Before video games, there were lawsuits and petitions about the dangers of visual media, about TV. Before that, there were parents protesting against the violence in radio plays. So while this seems like a very, very new thing, it's actually just pointing to the fact that the internet is what's growing and what's growing the fastest.
Got it. So now parents are looking at the internet as the potential danger to their kids.
Absolutely.
Some of this is being mandated by new laws, right? Talk to me about the sort of regulatory landscape that we're seeing around this and how that is evolving.
Yeah, right now it's on a state level for sure. So there's about 16 or so states in the United States that have already kind of established these age verification laws. So we have Arizona, we have Missouri, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming. And from these, because it's on a state level, there's a wide range of what these states require from companies, who has the burden of ensuring that their users are 18 plus, and who has the burden of enforcing these laws. So it's a little bit of a minefield, so to speak, for companies and internet users in particular.
And this is not just happening in the U.S. right now, right? What are we seeing? I mean, I know the U.K. recently passed the Online Safety Act.
Yeah.
That is also requiring some of this as well, right?
Absolutely. So the Online Safety Act was passed in on July 25th, I believe. And a lot of the United States laws actually mirror some of the problems that the UK is already having with online age verification. And you're seeing a lot of nations try to bring these up, and they're often promoted by political parties that have the aim, or at least profess the aim, of protecting children. After the UK passed the Online Safety Act, even though several United States officials didn't love it. I mean, even Vice President J.D. Vance went to the UK and spoke with officials and considered the bill an imposition on free speech. But you still see in a lot of statewide levels, people are saying age verification is the way to protect children.
Will you give us some examples of where people might start to see this showing up as they're using the internet, where they might be asked about their age, or where a platform, even if they don't know it, might be trying to figure out how old they are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the easiest thing people think of when they think of age verification are porn sites. So you assume that if you log on to a porn site, instead of just getting a little box that's like, check, make sure you're 18, they might ask for some form of identification. Now, this check is what people refer to as an age gate, right? It's a barrier that prevents people from accessing content until they verify through that particular website that they are at least 18 years of age. But when we're thinking about the internet, one of the things that has transformed is that sites aren't just for one thing anymore. So if you have a porn site, in a parent's mind, it might make sense to say, okay, I want to verify that my child, if they are not 18, can't access this. But what happens when we talk about platforms that can host explicit content, but might also be where people get help for their SATs? So you have these social media platforms like Blue Sky, X, formerly Twitter, and all of these places are where this sort of breaks down and gets a little questionable, but are where if you are in one of these states, all of a sudden you might see a little pop-up that says, please verify your age.
Got it. Yeah, it does feel like that is an important point about how this has all evolved. Like, those pop-ups on porn sites, or if you went to buy alcohol on a website, you for a long time have seen those click here to verify that you're X age. But now we're getting to a place where you have to do more than just clicking a box. You actually have to potentially provide some information.
Absolutely. And
verify.
I also think what's really interesting is when we talk about age gates, we're obviously talking about the internet, but we use age gates all of the time, right? When you go to a liquor store and the cashier asks you for your ID, that's an age gate. If you want to go to Vegas and you want to gamble and you have to provide your ID before you're allowed to get into the casino, that's an age gate. But the difference between in-person age gates and online age gates is when you hand a cashier your ID, they are able to put in the date of birth, and then the computer will allow them to let you purchase alcohol or enter a casino. And then that information disappears.
Right.
They see your ID, they can do a physical check, and they say, great. But what happens when you go online and you encounter a digital age gate? All of a sudden, the next question is, well, if I am allowed to access this or I need to access this, where does my data go?
Yeah, I want to get into that piece of it in a minute because I think that privacy question is really important here. We are also seeing some platforms say they're doing this voluntarily, testing out some of these age verification systems. YouTube recently announced that it's going to be using AI to try to guess how old users are and place users that it thinks are under 18 into these more restricted, protected teen settings. What do those companies have to gain from saying, we're going to try to start doing this, before regulation is passed?
One, it's a really easy way to kind of flag to legislative officials that they are not necessarily opposed to this if it were to come to pass or a bill were to pass in a state. Also, I think what people tend not to realize is when we're talking about these giant platforms, age verification is not something that you roll out with a button, right? It requires months and months of tech. You have to go through all of these different bugs. You have to figure out a way to write the code to make sure that the age gate works and works properly. And a lot of times, if these companies do not have age gate verification ready to go when bills are passed, bills could go into effect as quickly as 10 days. And in a lot of these states, some of which have a fine for each individual infraction. So if a 17-year-old was able to prove that they were able to access information past an age gate when they shouldn't have been able to, for a small company, that could be a $10,000 fine, which then increases every single time. So companies a lot of times are hedging bets on where the winds of legislation are going. And right now, they seem to be going towards age verification. And I think a lot of platforms don't want to be caught off guard.
How does age verification typically work? Like, what kinds of information might users be asked to provide?
It depends on the website, but the easiest one obviously is photo ID, which is your photo ID is registered with the government, and you're able to pretty accurately and pretty easily see, okay, this is a true ID or this is not a true ID. Other forms include, there's some facial recognition, credit cards, banking information. Anything that has your age already attached is a pretty good example of what can be used.
So you touched on this, but proponents of online age verification say it's necessary to protect kids. That is why, they say they're passing these regulations and why these companies, in many cases, say they want to do this. Do we have any indication of how successful these systems are at actually keeping kids from accessing harmful content, or is it too early to tell?
We are not able to tell yet. There's not a lot of data to turn into to kind of determine how many kids are being protected versus otherwise, because the internet is an anonymous place. So in order for that to work, we would really have to have a sense of how many kids are accessing these things in the first place,
right?
Which is something that very few companies have the data for.
And yeah, it's such a good point. And I think about who is it that is getting to define what counts as harmful or inappropriate for children?
Yeah. Do you remember that famous quote? I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. Or in a lot of these legislations, they have described platforms that have access to sexual content as needing age gates if the content has 33% or more inappropriate content. But on a state-by-state basis, that inappropriate is a myriad of things. So when we classify things under the frame of generally inappropriate, it gives a lot of power to these legislative branches who have very clearly said that they have an agenda.
And you mentioned this as well, but the rollout of age verification, the introduction of these age verification laws has raised concerns about online privacy. Talk a bit more about what the worry is there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, the internet we have right now is mostly anonymous. I have an IP address that is linked to me because I pay for my Wi-Fi, but the New York State government has no right to call Verizon and say, I want to know who this person is for an IP address unless they have a warrant. When we talk about age verification, it completely destroys the idea of online anonymity. A very good example is the T app, which had a major security breach earlier this year. It was an app designed to help women date safely. It was posited as a way to kind of verify who you were going on dates with and a community network. So women were required to upload photos of their driver's license, their ID, their state verification, and were then allowed on the app. Hackers released 72,000 records at least, which included people's home addresses, their IDs, their driver's license. And that's just one small app. Security online is such a nebulous thing. Data is something that you can sell. It is something that you can exchange. It is a commodity nowadays. And so when we're thinking about privacy, your data is something that you want to hold as close to your chest as possible. And all of these bills are suggesting that instead of holding this data close to your chest, you give it away to companies who it's in their best interest to not only hold on to it, but potentially sell it, use it to market to, or in worst cases, willfully hand it over to a government official.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, setting the concerns about government access to your information to one side, although I think that's really important. Like, you're right that these tech companies haven't always been the most responsible stewards of our personal information. We've seen this going back years. So it makes sense that people are worried about handing over their credit card or their ID. Do we know anything about how these companies are storing our personal information? Have they talked about this at all?
Several companies, I know YouTube is one of them, and Meta as well, who owns Facebook and Instagram, have put out statements about wanting to protect the data in states where there are age verification. But again, one of the things that gets really tricky when we're talking about a private company is you're not going to tell anyone where you store the data, right? You're just going to assure your consumers that it's in the best hands possible. But the thing is, when you go through an age gate and you willingly give up your information, a lot of times in terms and conditions of these websites, that's as far as you're allowed to go. And in some cases, companies do have the right to use some of the data that you give them. If you're giving it up willingly, all of a sudden you have way less control over who can see this and where it can go.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I asked YouTube about this when they started rolling out their AI age verification system, and they said, well, Google has state-of-the-art security. We want to protect people's data, to your point. They said they won't use it for advertising purposes, but that's sort of as far as they went. It's like, okay, well, what else might you use this for?
Thank you so much. I know for a fact that when I give them my ID card, I won't get an Amazon ad, but where's my driver's license going?
Right. You talked about this a bit too, but free speech advocates have raised this concern that age verification can infringe on people's First Amendment rights. After YouTube rolled, not to pick on YouTube too much, but after they rolled out this policy, there were people calling for a boycott, claiming in part that this new system infringed on their free speech. Talk a bit more about what age verification has to do with free speech online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked to a bunch of experts in this, actually. I talked to an ACLU staff attorney, a fellow at the R Street Institute, and also an activist at Electronic Frontier Foundation. And when we're talking about age verification and free speech, I'm going to go back once again to the idea as the internet right now is an anonymous place. And that is where free speech thrives. But once we require age verification, it includes a link to who you are as a person to your digital platforms. And in a lot of sense, that could potentially dissuade people from speaking out, from having these kind of public platforms, from publicly stating their own opinions. And I also think it creates just a gaping hole for government overreach.
Do these advocates, I'm curious how they're sort of grappling with the fact that obviously there are problems with young people accessing, again, it's sort of like who decides what's harmful, but we've seen kids, struggling with body image issues and depression, and in some cases accessing extremist content that's scary. Like, how do these activists or advocates think there's a better way to keep kids safe online that doesn't involve age verification?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a lot of different ideas. Personally, I have always thought that this is a parent-level problem that we have made into a constituent-level boondoggle. And in a lot of cases, I think you can see that with a lot of these age verification laws. In many states, the state is not actually going to go after companies. It's not like there's going to be a watchdog agency that is checking to make sure age verification works. But what these laws do allow is a disgruntled parent to easily sue a company. And when you think about it from that perspective, the idea is that these laws inherently assume that the watchdog will be the parents.
Parents, right.
So if all of these age verification laws imply having a familial or a parental person in charge, I think it's very clear to assume that instead of passing these laws, maybe we could just suggest to parents who are concerned to have a more active part in what their children are consuming online.
Yeah, it's so hard because we hear from parents like, please help us, like we're trying, and things move so quickly. Something I'm curious about too is we've talked about, we're seeing different laws go into place in different states and different countries. Does this mean that your experience on the internet might really start to depend on where you are? What state you're in, what country you're in? You might have a totally different experience than somebody in another state.
I think we could totally see that in the future if we see more age verification laws pass and we see them pass more widely and more consistently. I think right now it won't be about if your time on the internet or what you're seeing on the internet is different than someone may say in Iowa or Wyoming. But I think what you could definitely see is people in those states that already have age verification laws have a much harder time accessing the information that they need to. So it's not that we might see a different internet in New York where we don't have age verification laws currently. Like I don't have to go through an age gate to post on Blue Sky or Twitter. But for a 20-year-old in North Dakota or an undocumented immigrant in Texas, they might be the ones who are kind of at a loss.
Yeah, they might have to provide personal information that somebody in New York wouldn't have to provide.
Absolutely.
Sort of on that point, like, is it possible for people to just get around these age gates by using a VPN that makes it look like they're in a state where age verification isn't required? Or are there other workarounds that you're starting to see?
Yeah, the workaround that we see obviously the most is VPN usage. They're easily accessible.
Yeah.
What I would say is that in a lot of ways, we are pushing people who want to use the internet to use sketchier and sketchier ways. VPNs are ways, in case your audience doesn't know, it's a way that you can kind of camouflage where you're searching the internet from. So when it comes through to the company, it will say, oh, this person is Googling this or searching this or trying to access this from Vienna, when really you're in Austin, right? You're using a VPN. There are reputable VPNs and there are not reputable VPNs. And so you kind of see this problem where, okay, if you're talking to a 16-year-old in Texas, they're like, oh, I'm not worried. I'm going to use a VPN. Are they using the best VPN or are they using a VPN that is attached to someone who's already selling their data?
Right.
And so you see you have the same problem where these VPNs and these back alleyways into the internet without giving your identification are coincidentally could be exposing children to the very thing their parents pushed for these legislations to prevent. And I think another thing that I would love to bring up that I think people don't think of is the laws have also been posited as a way to prevent a big tech conglomeration from winning, right? They're saying this is how we curb big tech. This is how we make sure that these tech companies are not gaining copious amounts of power. But in the example of Blue Sky, which is a decentralized blogging platform, in Mississippi, instead of applying an age gate, they shut down entirely because they don't have the funds that a YouTube, that a Meta has. And so I think in more cases like this, if age verification were to pass in other states, you would see smaller platforms being forced to choose between servicing these states at all or building systems that they frankly don't have the cash for.
What's next here? Do you think we're going to see more of these laws passed in the United States?
I think they will at least be proposed. I think there are a couple more southern states that I could easily see them passing in. I also think that we will see more of a coordinated effort to have a legal stop to this. I'm not sure how successful that this will be, but what I am most concerned about is the idea that in states where this has already passed, government officials being able to use these accessible data points.
Yeah, well, and I just wonder, too, how many more, I mean, hopefully not, but how many more instances like the T-app we'll see where hackers get access to people's personal information that they've had to hand over in order to keep accessing these websites. I'm curious what you think if somebody lives in a place where age verification is required, how should they think about navigating this? Like, should they hand over their personal information? Are some of these verification techniques, like is a selfie better than handing over an ID? What's your advice to people?
I would say the ID should be your last result. And I'm not encouraging illegal activity, but in some cases, a very highly rated VPN is the best way to go.
Yeah.
Once we get past a very highly rated VPN, I would suggest possibly a credit card, if that is something that is cancelable. If you have warning systems set up in place against someone stealing your identity, that might be a better option. So like a cancelable credit card. I think you can send the selfie. I personally don't do visual verification at all because I'm a little cuckoo.
Tech reporters.
Literally, I won't do it, which also as a music reporter means that there are some venues that I can't go to because they use facial verification. I don't use facial verification in airports. So that's something that I don't do. But if you are someone who already does that, I think a selfie might be the best chance. I would just really, really advise against giving people your ID, your license, especially if you know that you're going to look something up that your state government might not approve of.
Yeah, well, the credit card is such a good point, too, because in many cases, people are already handing over their credit card information, whether it's for a subscription to a site or because they're buying something through these sites. So that
if you have a credit card saved at Nordstrom, you're okay. Just give YouTube your credit card. It's okay.
Well, CT, thank you so much for doing this. This is a really interesting and important conversation, so I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.